Thank you. I'm also happy that I did not trip over anything on the way to the microphone. So I consider that a win every presentation. So first of all, just to give you some background on production at WK, we do a lot of things very similar to what the other speakers have talked about. So we are currently publishing approximately 300 journals. Oh, sorry. Approximately 300 journals, and they all have varying workflows. So some of them are very complex, some of them publish weekly, some of them have one template and publish once a year. So we really do run the gamut. I know, as Ed was saying, with vendors asking about your templates, I think I have 50 journals with 90 templates at one vendor, and they don't like me. But we're working on it. It really just depends. So my talk today is going to be more about vendor transitions. So as we've all discussed, we're all using vendors. And so I thought I would go into a bit of what are they actually doing for us. So your vendor could copy edit manuscripts. Again, not so many for Ed, but, but compose proof pages, convert the content to XML, and also print the content. XML and conversion and our specified DTDs has become more and more important as we've gone along. So it's been very important for us to find vendors who know exactly what we want and to make sure that they're consistently doing that. So for prepress vendors and vendor transitions, why as publishers would we look to transition vendors? One of the best reasons to transition is when new technology becomes available, and it's part of that tension between the quality and the speed. A lot of our customers are putting a greater value on decreased time to publication, so we've talked to different vendors who, through their own automation, are able to speed up some of that proof process. Price can be another factor. It certainly is not the only factor, but it is something that we do look at as contracts expire. We want to work to make sure that if prices are increasing at our vendors, that we're making sure that we're evening things out on that end as well. So quality concerns is probably the scariest reason to transition any vendor, but things can happen. So what happens when vendors begin to fail? So the first thing that usually happens with us is that our internal staff begin to notice delays in schedule and quality lapses. The worst thing that can happen is that our customers could notice. So of course, as publishers, we're doing everything we can to catch things before it goes to our customers, but at times they can also loop us in. It's never a good day when that happens. So when we start to see vendors fail, we begin immediately providing feedback. So we escalate both internally as well as with the vendor. And we have a standard internal escalation procedure that we use. It's part of our day-to-day vendor management. We're receiving daily reports in some cases, or weekly reports. We have regular calls, and we also visit our vendors at their facilities to make sure we're keeping abreast of what's going on. So if something were to go wrong, we really just take those steps up a notch. So if we were having a weekly call, maybe we're having a daily call, or maybe we're receiving daily reports. We also look to staff and leadership changes. So we had one journal where quality suddenly fell down, and when we really started looking into it, what happened was that one of the main people on the composition team had left the vendor, and we just weren't notified. So sometimes it can be as simple as that, identifying, oh, this person has gone, now we're going to have a training time, and we can put in additional quality checks on our side to kind of work through that with the vendor. Unfortunately, that doesn't always work. So if we've gone through all of our normal steps and we're not able to correct things or get them to be at the level of quality we need them to be, our very final step would be to transition to a vendor who actually can meet our needs. So once we've made that decision, we go through the process of identifying new vendors. So we, of course, look to our existing vendors. We have a stable pool of vendors that we use regularly, and we know their capabilities. We are also, as part of our vendor management program, actively talking to other vendors. And we receive feedback from other publishers. I'm sure you can all appreciate how important references can be when you're talking about moving your journal work to another vendor. And we attend conferences like SSP. If there are so many vendors that are here, it can be a good place, a good starting point to start some conversations and get some more information. Of course, before we go forward with any moves, we want to make sure we're testing the vendor to make sure that they really can live up to our expectations. So in order to do that, we provide as much information to them as possible. So that's your schedule, your style guide, your template, and the volume. The tricky thing with volume is you want to be able to give them the historical data as well as current, because there can be some differences based on either the time of the year that you're in, and maybe all of your supplements come in at the end of the year, but you're talking to them in February. So it's just some things to keep in mind. Providing firm deadlines is also something that's very important. And you want to make sure that you are talking to the vendor to make sure that they are agreeing. So you don't want to hand them all of your information and say, okay, I'll take that tomorrow because I'm in a rush. So you need to give them the appropriate time so that they can study your style guide and review their current tools to see what works best. And then once those deadlines are met, we review the copy editing and the composition samples that we receive, and we're looking really to see, was quality met? Was the schedule maintained? What things were missed and what things were not. And then if we go through that process and things look like they're moving along pretty well, we go to our next step, which we call parallel issue testing. And it's exactly what it sounds like. We have the vendor go through a full issue's worth of work at the same time as our current vendor is producing this work. So we're reviewing content at each stage. Copy editing, composition, are they able to implement our corrections appropriately? What does the folioed issue look like? How are those figures? What instructions were followed? What instructions may have been missed? And there's many, many other checks. So why would we go through all of this work? Because it is a bit of double work. The benefits truly are there's so much less risk to the content, and the vendor actually can get a good sense of the volume of the work and the workflow before any real live deadlines can be affected and before our customers are affected. The downside to this, of course, besides the additional work, is the additional cost, because you're certainly paying for this additional testing. We have found that the benefits far outweigh the problems with cost. Keeping our customers happy is so much more important, and we've really found a way with parallel testing that has helped mitigate some problems with transitions. Okay, so once your parallel issue is done, and you're going to go ahead and evaluate the issue just as you will evaluate samples before that. And it's very important to look at things that maybe they need to improve upon, but also really what they did well, and to give them that feedback. And you need to listen to your team. So is your team confident that this new vendor can take on this work? Because if your team isn't confident, they're really your first line of defense. So we're always looking to our production editors for feedback. And then based on the results of answering all of those questions, as well as the complexity of the journal, sometimes a second test issue will be necessary. And we have actually done that in the past, and it does help to close up any gaps or any miscommunications or misunderstandings. Okay, so if you have to decide that you need to change a vendor, we like to start with identifying an actual start date with them. So again, considering their schedule, their ramp-up time, and their capacity. as well as the internal capacity and the internal plans, because you need to make sure you're taking into account the additional support your team's going to need. Notifying stakeholders and customers is also very important. We want to make sure that you're addressing any of their concerns, that you're getting feedback from them, and that you're having an open conversation. As publishers, we are certainly not living in a vacuum. So our customers are why we're here, and we need to make sure we're listening to them and we're gaining and earning their confidence. The next part is not nearly as fun in most instances, is when you're notifying the current vendor of the move. So you want to include the date and the issue when the work should stop. And also reinforce the expectation that any work that you still have with them really does need to continue. They can't just stop and walk away. However, you have to be prepared with a contingency plan in case that is in fact what happens. So, once you've done all of that and you're ready to move to your live issue, the first several live issues should be monitored really as closely as the parallel. So we have found for most vendors it takes about 4 to 6 months before they're fully stable and they fully have their arms around every facet of the workflow. So, during those 4 to 6 months, there's very close management between the production staff and the management team. And again, that's the QC steps at every stage. So there's certainly a lot of work that goes into this, but it's the way we have figured out how to do it successfully. And throughout the live issues, daily checking with the vendors, either whether it's through a call or a report or an email or something saying, okay, this is what's going on today, to make sure everyone's on the same page. Because it is amazing to me how many things can be miscommunicated when someone really thought they were very clear. So the continued open line of communication is very clear, or very important. So while you're doing all of these extra QC steps, how are you supporting the full team? So you have authors and editors and other publishing partners that are kind of going through this testing and QC with you. And what we have found is really, as a management team, being as close as we can and as kind of open and honest with what the resources that we have. So it's very important if you're doing this to know the level of support that you have, because you want to make sure you have that ready before something goes wrong. So again, we're kind of always planning for the worst, hoping for the best, and expecting somewhere in between. And again, very close coordination with the production editors. They really are your first and last line of defense with vendors, customers, and authors. So it's very important to support them and to make sure they know how much they are appreciated for what they're doing. Again, our staff should know that we support them throughout this full process. So it's not uncommon for someone to say that they're overwhelmed because of something that's going on with the transition. So we, have additional support in place for them, and we let them know that we're here to listen, whether it's just to vent or to figure out a new strategy if they're having problems getting anything done. So with that, that's kind of the transition workflow we've worked out in a nutshell. Does anyone have any questions about that, or should we move it to the panel?
I have just one question.
Sure.
Could I ask one question before we go to the panel? When you were talking about the parallel testing before you actually hire on a new vendor, do you do that during the RFP process, or is that after you've selected someone?
We do that after we've selected someone. So we would do the sampling during the RFP process, and then from the samples go back and say, this group seems to be the best.
Okay, so you do sample with a number.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's what I was looking for, sorry.
That's okay. Sorry if I wasn't clear.
Excellent.
Anything else?
Great.
All right, thank you.